Hello and welcome guys to another video, and today we've got a track guide for the Monza combined for the GT3 Sprint Series. So let's have a look at the Hotlap and then we'll have a look at the guide. So for the oval, it's fairly straightforward. We want to just try and stay as low as possible and as close to this yellow line. Basically put the right tyre just above this yellow line and just follow this oval round. Really nice and simple. It's full throttle obviously, and we're just trying to stay just above that yellow line. It's a little bit bumpy at places, so just have light hands with the steering wheel so you don't overreact to any of the bumps. Just keep it nice and smooth. And then the same for this part of the oval again. We're going to keep it very close to this yellow line on the right hand side. We've got a little bit of a wider entry on this one, and then for the mid corner we just do the exact same as the first oval. Just keep it nice and close to this yellow line on the inside, and it's just full throttle. Put as little steering input as possible just to keep it close to that yellow line. And now we have a look at the first proper corner, and we're looking to the left hand side, and because we've been full throttle since basically Parabolica, we've got a lot of speed, so this is a very high braking zone. So we're looking at the left and we're looking at this 150 meter board, and we're braking at that 150 meter board down through the gears and keeping it as far to the left as possible, being careful not to touch that grass. And then we begin to turn in just after this strip of green tarmac starts on the left. I don't know if it's tarmac or is concrete or something like that, but that strip there on the left, just after that starts, we want to begin to turn into the corner. It's first gear and we're aiming to take as much of this orange curb as possible on the apex. It's nice and flat, so we want to basically try and open up this first part of the corner as much as possible, because we want to be able to get on the power nice and early for the second part of the chicane. So we get back onto the power just as we come off that curb, but as you see, we're trying to get over to the right here to open up this left-hander. So now getting onto the power, and then we begin to turn into the left-hander just as this orange sausage curb on the inside begins to disappear underneath the bonnet, we want to turn in, get nice and close to that orange curb, but only use the flat curbing because the orange curb will unsettle the car. And then get on the power nice and early, around about just after the halfway mark around that corner. Get onto the power really nice and early and just unwind the steering wheel as quick as possible. You do have to watch with the acceleration zones on this track. Because of the oval, the cars have such little downforce that you have very little grip on the exit of some of the corners. So you have to be careful with the throttle. And obviously, the straighter the wheel is when you apply the throttle, the easier that's going to be. So just try and straighten up the wheel as early as possible. Now, for the second chicane, we're looking to the right-hand side, and we've got this marker here, this red marker at the end of the barrier, and we've also got the 100-meter board. So we brake in between those two markers, and we're braking down the gears, bringing it over to the right-hand side of the track, and we begin to turn in just after this curb starts on the right hand side. So just after that starts, we want to turn in second gear and take quite a bit of this curbing. We're putting the left tire over here. Unlike some of the variations of Monza, we can actually take a lot of curbing there. Now, as you see, just coasting at the first part and then getting on the throttle as it stabilizes off that curb, and then bringing it into the right-hander, again turning in for the right just as the orange curb begins to disappear underneath our car. Turn into the right-hander. We're using quite a bit of curbing here on the right-hand side, but the car stabilizes very quickly coming off the curb. Get on the power nice and early and just straighten up that wheel. You can put the left side tire on this green tarmac on the edge of the curbing as well. That won't invalidate you and it gives you a little bit of extra track to use. Now, for the double Lesmos, this is a bit tricky because there isn't really a good marker. So if we play it really slow, we'll see at this point we begin to brake and turn in. Now we've got this orange marker and we're about two car lengths or so before that marker. So you can use that, that's probably your best marker, or you can use, say, about 3 car lengths before that escape road on the left, whichever is easier to use as a reference. There isn't any boards. So braking into third gear and just trying to get nice and close to this red and white curbing. Close to the apex, just a little bit of braking on the entry, and then just coast it around the apex. And we want to get on the power just before we reach this red marker at the apex. If we get on the power then, and then it's going to drift out to the left, and we're going to be able to use this green tarmac on the exit. If we're using this, this is really good because it means we're taking the maximum track limits that's available to us. And now for the second Lesmo, we do actually have a braking marker. So we're braking just before the 50-meter board down into third gear, I think it is. Yeah, third gear. And we turn in just before we get to this line. So the line where this gravel starts. Just before we get to that, we want to turn in. And we can use quite a bit of curbing on the right-hand side here. Don't use too much because it will unsettle the car. We want to be getting on the power before we get to that curb. So obviously if you use too much, it's just going to bump the car and then it's not going to want to grip up and accelerate properly. So just make sure to only use a little bit of that curb if you use it. But the main curb that you want to be using is this exit curb again, because if you're using all this, that means you're maximizing the track limit. So make sure you're taking advantage of that on the exit. Now going into probably the trickiest part of the track with these setups, because of the oval and because of so many straights at Monza, the downforce is really low. Most of the cars, the downforce is on minimum. So we have to be very careful and keep the car as stable as possible and use as little steering input as possible because we don't really have much aero to play with. So going into the entry, we're looking at this 100-meter board and also this escape road on the right hand side, and we're braking in between those two markers. So in between those two markers we want to get onto the brakes. Now we want to turn in around about this point. There isn't really a marker for it. What you could use is about halfway down this curb. We can see there's this red patch here that's a bit brighter compared to the two next to it. So you can use that as a reference if you want. Turn in when you get to that red marker. It's third gear, and we want to use quite a bit of curbing on the left. We can use a little bit of this anti-cut curb. Just make sure you get onto the power before you touch it, because if you don't, it's going to unsettle the car a bit more. And then, as you see, progressively get onto the power as we bring it over to the right hand side. And we want to use this curb on the right to basically hook us around to the right, and that will allow us to use a bit less steering input, because we want to keep the car as stable as possible. Now, you can see that there's these little anti-cut curbs on the inside. Now, we can actually use these are fine to use. Just be careful, because if you hit them wrong, they can really unsettle the car. So you can either put a wheel basically just on the edge of them, or you can be a bit safer and put the wheel over closer to the white line. But obviously, to hook it round to the corner, you want to use those curbs. Just be careful with the stability. Now, going into this left-hander, we want to be full throttle by the time we get past those anti-cut curbs. So full throttle here, and this is the corner that I was talking about, that you've got to be really careful with how much steering input you have, because we just do not have very much aero. So very little steering input into this left-hander. Try and keep it as straight as possible, and we can use a bit of that anti-cut curb just to make it less of an aggressive angle for that left-hander, and just try and straight line the exit as much as possible. And again, we can use all this runoff on the right-hand side, just maximize the track limits. So for the last corner, we want to look at the 100 and the 50 meter board and brake between those two boards. Now, about halfway between those two boards, we're braking, and then about 2 car lengths before the grass ends on the left-hand side, we want to turn in. Now, the apex is quite light. We want to apex basically between this overhanging board, I think it's an advertising board usually, and this pole over here. So about halfway between those two markers is our apex, and we want to get on the throttle just before we get to that pole. So between those two markers is the apex, and just before we get to the pole, we want to get onto the power, and then progressively get onto the power, and then just after we pass this red marker, we then should be full throttle. Now, this does depend on how much grip there is in the session, because we've got such a low wing. If it's a really slidey track, we will have to be a bit more careful on the throttle. So that is it for the track guide, guys. As always, thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again next time.